Hello again folks, and welcome to part 2 of my video on the Dewalt Radial Arm Saw. In part 1 I showed you the various principles of the saw. I showed you the two saws and explained why I got two saws. In this part I'll show a bit more of the saws working. I'll also show you my homemade mitre jigs that I've made for the saws, and the fence stop where I cut pieces off at the same length, and various other bits and pieces. So I hope you'll find it of some interest. Now both the saws are very similar, but there are a few differences. The one thing is, on the better of the models, you've got a more modern no volt release switch here. Now on this model, down here on the front here, you've got your no volt release switch, and this is the more original type, the larger type that you mount on the wall normally. And you have to press that to start the saw. However, on this particular model, it's also got a switch up here. Now I can't press that switch at the moment because it's got this strange arrangement where you need a key. And this is the key, and you have to pop that key in there like so, and then you can switch it on. Obviously it won't work at the moment because I haven't pressed the no volt release switch, and I haven't got the power on anyway, so it won't work at all. But unless you've got that switched on with the key, then it won't work there. So it's got a double safety device. Now once you've got that on, you can actually take the key out. I normally take the key out and I leave that on all the time, and I just operate it via this switch at the front here. Underneath the saw I've got like an aquavac type vacuum. It's only an ordinary domestic vacuum cleaner, an old one that I've bodged up with a filter in, and a large container like a small dustbin, and that sucks all the sawdust up, well most of it anyway, and I'll show you what I've done. Down in there there's a little hose fitted in. I used a hot melt glue gun to fix it in here, and this box collects the sawdust as the saw throws it back, and down through that tube there and into the vacuum cleaner, which is underneath the saw. On the left is the old aquavac, and on the right is an old Phillips machine, and they'll go for months before I need to empty them. They're just simple machines with basically a dustbin underneath. You don't need to bother about bags and things like that. And you can see here is the hose. This runs down from the saw above into the side of the machine, and the same on the other one there. They come on automatically when I switch the main switch for the machines on. Right, turn on. That's the suction on and the light, and then press the switch and away it will go. And then just pull the saw gently over. Take the headphones off. I can't talk with headphones on, it's weird. Now you'll see what a lovely clean cut that's done on there, look. It's square and it's clean. Now the thing to remember is, when you're pulling this saw across, you don't actually need to pull it across. Because of the way the blade's rotating, it does tend to ride itself across the wood. So mainly what you're doing, rather than pulling the saw across, you are generally restraining it from flying across, because it will, if it digs into the wood, this can fly across the wood like that, and then it will jam, the saw blade will jam and it will stall. So what you're doing basically is holding it against it pulling across. So obviously you pull it to start it, but when it starts to bite the wood, you're gently restraining it and let it go across at its own pace, or like that, and it'll do a good job. On this particular saw, the 1201, I've got the same principle. I've got a little light here, and I've got a suction device under here where the dust goes in, and I've got another old vacuum cleaner underneath. It's just an old Phillips domestic wet and dry cleaner, and I just use it for sawdust, and it does the job brilliantly. The same principle, I just press the switch on there, and that turns the light on and the suction device, and then to use the saw you just press the button over there. I will just cut the same on this so you can see it working. Pop the wood on there. Oh, I must put my headphones on because it is noisy, obviously. There we go. Turn on. Generally speaking, I don't need to use the switch on the saw to turn it off. If you turn the power off there, because it's got the no volt release switch, it just goes off automatically, the whole lot. Notice the amount of teeth on the blade here. This is an 80 tooth blade, which gives a very fine cut. Obviously, for rip sawing, you need a blade with far fewer teeth, but for cross-cutting, the more teeth the better. You get a much smoother finish with a blade like this. They are more expensive, but they do a good job. So that's the DW1201, but we'll concentrate on the main saw really to show you the features of it. One of the useful features of a radial arm saw is the ability to be able to cut off lots of pieces at exactly the same dimensions, and I'll show you what I mean. Down here I've got a pile of various pieces of wood. It's only scrap stuff. I've taken an old cabinet apart for my daughter and she wants me to make her a rack, so I'm using the same timber, and I need to cut these all off at 9 inches. I'm just going to use this piece of wood here, which I've made, put it that way up, and I'm going to set that at, I've got a little measure along the top here, and I'm going to set this at 9 inches and simply clamp it on the top like this, and then all I've got to do is to bring my piece of wood along like this. I'll put first of all, to get a nice square edge, and that needs to cut off anyway because it's a bad piece. I need to cut a little piece off this end and then push it along to that block, and I can do as many as I like and they'll all be exactly the same size. I cut the square edge, cut the end off first, and simply push it along the end of the block here. Now there's one piece that's 9 inches long. All I've got to do then So now you can see I've cut off my pile of pieces, and they're all exactly 9 inches, and I did it in a matter of seconds. If you look at the block, you'll notice that I've cut away the bottom of the block and the top. The reason for that is when you're using the saw, bits of sawdust will fly along and they'll catch underneath or in front of this. I'll put it another way. If I have the block the other way round, like this, at 9 inches, like so, bits of sawdust will gradually build up against that block so that subsequent pieces will be cut a little bit too short because of the blockage. By making a cutaway at the bottom and the top of this piece, the sawdust will go underneath and it won't cause a problem. You're wondering why I've got a smaller one and a larger one. It depends on the thickness of wood I'm using. If I'm using thicker wood, then I leave the larger gap there because it can accommodate more bits of sawdust, if that makes sense. Whereas if I'm using very thin timber, obviously I can't have that gap too large there. It's just enough to collect the sawdust. I hope that makes that clear. It sounds a bit daft, but that's the reason for that. Many years ago I made this little device here, and what this is, it's a homemade stop block, and basically all you do, you pop it over the fence like so. Actually that's the wrong way around, I think. And then I've got a cam action on here, and you simply press down on that and it tightens up at the bottom here and it locks it into any particular position, so that you can then unloosen it and move it along to the next position as you like. But actually I found it's just as quick to use this bit a block of wood and just clamp it on the back. So generally speaking I use this. It's quicker than messing about with my homemade block, to be honest. Now the other thing about a radial arm saw, you're going to say, well obviously, you know, he's saying, oh, cut short bits off. Well, I can do that on my chop saw. Well, of course you can, because chop saws do have an extension piece on it where you can cut pieces off to a certain length. But generally speaking, most chop saws that the do-it-yourselfer uses only have a short extension on it. You can't do long pieces. But the table on my saw, my radial arm saw, is approximately 8 foot long, which means it will accommodate really long pieces. Whereas a chop saw, generally speaking, you can have extensions on them that they're not normally that long. You could of course build it into a bench, I suppose, like this. As well as cutting off the short pieces, I need to cut some longer pieces for this rack. I just clamped a little block similar to the other one with a slot in it, and it's just the same method as before. I just cut the end of the wood off here to square it, push it along to this block and cut as many as I like off, and they'll all be exactly the right length. Now, as I've already said, if you rotate the head around, say to 45 degrees, you can use the saw to cut accurate mitres. The only problem with that is it will cut through the backing, the fence at the back. Obviously, you know, if you turn that round and then switch the saw on, you've got to put it through that fence, and it will cut the fence, and then before long, you know, you've got all sorts of cuts across the fence. I mean, it doesn't probably matter that much, but if you're doing it a lot, you eventually, at different angles, you'd find the fence was partially destroyed. Also, it leaves marks across your table, which I don't like. So what I've done to do mitres, I've made myself up a jig. They did supply some special jigs that you could use to do it, which were an optional extra, but I just decided to make my own. So to cut mitres, all I did, I come up with this simple piece of board. It's just a piece of old chipboard, to which I've attached a hardwood fence, and I've got two wing nuts and bolts through there. You'll notice that one's fixed, but this one's adjustable. Now the idea is that you set that exactly at 90 degrees to the saw blade, and by doing that you can cut accurate mitres, and I will just illustrate that. Now I've got a couple of bits of wood here, and I'm just going to show you how to cut a mitre using my homemade jig. All you got to do is put this on the table, push it against the fence at the back there and get it near to the blade. Put your headphones on, turn on obviously, switch on. And there you have it, a perfect mitre. What could be simpler? A few weeks ago we had a wet day, and it's too wet doing outside, so I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a go at making a new one of these that I can set at different angles. This is one of the reasons why I've made this video about the saw, because I wanted to show you my jig that I've made, but I had to explain the saw first. And this is the jig here. And it's rather larger than before. What I've done, I've made it so that I've got it the wrong way around, haven't I? It goes around that way. I made the blimmin' thing, I ought to know that, hadn't I? I think, do you know, I've forgotten how to use it. No, I had it right the first time. What am I on about? I'm a dope, I am. Now you'll see I've got two arms on this one, a right and a left. And unlike my other one, it's adjustable, so you just undo this wing nut and you can move the arms around either way. Now, that's set at roughly 45 degrees, so that when you're cutting one side of a mitre, you can cut it on this one, and when you want to do the other side, you can cut it on that one. Now, obviously, if you're doing 45 degrees on a flat piece of wood, you can just turn the wood over, so it's not a problem. But if you're doing something on a piece of moulding which has got a round edge on it, it's not easy to hold it against the fence, so it's handy to be able to do the other side, so to speak. So that's why I put two on there. Now, I'll just show it working. Just set the thing to whatever angle you want. I'll put it round here. It's at 45. I'll just put it round there, look. First time ever. That works fine. Just for information purposes, what I've done to make it, on the top end I've put a nut and bolt, and I've got a lock-in nut there so that it'll stay at a certain tightness, or slackness shall we say, I don't know what the word, it's in between. So it's just right, so it'll move, but it won't become loose and it's not too tight. And then I've got a bolt with a wing nut here. Now, I've just cut this slot on the actual table. I use my fret saw, my Hegner fret saw, to cut that slot in there. And then if you look underneath, I'll just show the underneath of it. It's a bit Heath Robinson, but it does the job. There's the bolt head for the adjustment, and you'll notice these triangular plates. These are some little bits of plywood that I had, that scrap plywood, and I've mounted them so that it lifts the bolt heads off the surface. I've put quite a few to keep it square, but that just keeps the thing flat and level, and it means you don't have to sink the bolts into the actual timber. As far as woodworking machines go, I think radial arm saw is one of the safest machines in the workshop actually. Obviously you have to treat all machines with respect and be careful and know what you're doing. You don't want to be half dopey when you're doing it, if you've been on the drink or something. As I say, I bought this in 1985 and it's still going strong now. So what's that, 35 years use. And I still use them regularly and they really are good saws. So if you ever see one second hand and you're a woodworker and you haven't got one, buy it. Anyway, I think that's all for now about the saws. I'll probably think of something else in a bit that I forgot to mention. So if I don't think of anything else to put on the end, this is the end. Goodbye folks, and thanks very much for watching.